The mansion stood like a monument to success, rising above the city with its gleaming windows and perfectly manicured gardens. Every corner of it whispered wealth. The driveway was lined with imported stone, the fountain at the entrance carved from Italian marble, and inside, chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls of crystal. It was the kind of home people pointed to from the street, the kind featured in magazines, the kind that seemed to have everything. But behind those tall iron gates, beneath the gold-trimmed ceilings and silk curtains, lived a sadness that no amount of money could erase. Richard Calloway was the man who owned it all. He had built his empire from almost nothing, clawing his way up through ruthless determination and sharp instincts. By the time he was 40, his name was spoken in boardrooms across the world. He controlled real estate, tech investments, international markets. He could buy anything, influence anyone. But when he came home each evening, past the guards and through the towering doors, he entered a world where his power meant nothing. His daughter, Emma, was 7 years old. She had soft brown hair that fell in gentle waves, large hazel eyes that watched the world with quiet intensity, and a face so delicate it seemed she might break if someone spoke too loudly. She was beautiful in a way that made people pause, but she had never spoken, not once, not a single word, not a cry as a baby, not a giggle as a toddler, just silence. Richard had first noticed something was different when Emma was 2. Other children her age were babbling, forming words, asking endless questions. Emma only stared. He told himself she was just slow to develop, that she would catch up. But months turned into years, and the silence remained. His wife, Catherine, had tried everything. She read parenting books, consulted specialists, changed diets, tried music therapy. Nothing worked. And then, when Emma was 4, Catherine left. She could not bear it anymore, she said. The guilt, the exhaustion, the feeling that she had somehow failed as a mother. She kissed Emma goodbye one morning and never came back. Richard was left alone with a child he did not know how to reach. He hired nannies, the best he could find. They came with impressive credentials, promises, and plans. They used flashcards and reward systems, sensory toys, and structured routines. But Emma remained distant, locked inside herself. One by one, they quit. Some said she was too difficult. Others said there was no hope. Richard began to believe them. Doctors offered diagnoses that sounded like prison sentences: autism spectrum disorder, selective mutism, developmental delay. They gave him pamphlets and prescriptions, therapy schedules, and coping strategies. He spent hundreds of thousands on treatments that went nowhere. Speech therapists sat across from Emma with colorful charts and patient smiles, but she never responded. Psychologists tried to coax words from her with games and gentle questions, but she only looked away. One specialist, a man flown in from Switzerland, spent 3 weeks observing Emma and then told Richard bluntly that some children simply never speak. It was just the way things were. Richard stopped inviting doctors after that. He threw himself into his work, spending longer hours at the office, traveling more often. It was easier than sitting in that silent house, watching his daughter play alone with toys she never made a sound over. The staff learned not to mention her condition. The maids cleaned around her as if she were a piece of furniture. The cook left meals outside her door. Everyone treated Emma like a ghost. But Richard could not forget her. At night, when he returned home exhausted, he would stand outside her bedroom door and listen. He hoped, irrationally, that he might hear her voice just once, that she might call for him, say his name, ask for water, anything. But there was only silence, and every night that silence felt heavier. The mansion had a staff of 12. There were gardeners who kept the hedges trimmed into perfect shapes, a driver who polished the cars until they gleamed, a chef who prepared meals no one seemed to enjoy, and several housekeepers who rotated through the endless task of keeping such a large home spotless. They were efficient, professional, and invisible. Richard barely knew their names. To him, they were just part of the machinery that kept his life running. When Mrs. Hernandez, the head housekeeper, announced she was retiring, Richard did not give it much thought. He signed off on her replacement without even conducting an interview. The agency sent someone, and that was enough. He had more important things to worry about. A merger was falling apart, a competitor was trying to undercut him, and his lawyers were demanding his attention. He forgot about the new cleaning lady until the day she arrived. Her name was Rosa Martinez. She was 53 years old, though her hands looked older, weathered from decades of hard work. She had cleaned houses since she was 16, supporting her family after her father died. She had raised 3 children on her own, working 2 jobs, sacrificing everything so they could go to school and have better lives. Her eldest son was now a teacher, her daughter a nurse, her youngest still in college. Rosa was proud of them, but she was tired. Her back ached, her knees hurt, and some mornings it was hard to get out of bed. But she needed the money, so she took the job at the Calloway mansion. On her first day, Rosa stood outside the iron gates and looked up at the enormous house. It was more beautiful than anything she had ever seen, but it also felt cold. She walked up the long driveway, her worn shoes making soft sounds on the stone. A butler opened the door and let her inside without a word. He showed her where the cleaning supplies were kept, handed her a schedule, and left. Rosa stood alone in the gleaming foyer, feeling very small. She started in the east wing, dusting shelves lined with books that looked like they had never been opened. The furniture was elegant, but stiff, the kind you did not sit on. Everything was perfect, but nothing felt lived in. As she worked, she noticed photographs on the walls. Richard Calloway at charity galas, shaking hands with politicians, standing in front of skyscrapers. But there were no family photos, no pictures of smiling children or happy moments. It felt like a museum, not a home. On her second day, Rosa was cleaning the hallway near the staircase when she saw the little girl. Emma was sitting at the top of the stairs, her legs tucked beneath her, staring down through the railing. She wore a pale blue dress and held a stuffed rabbit. Rosa smiled and waved. Emma did not wave back. She just watched, with those large, serious eyes. Rosa went back to her work, humming softly to herself. Over the next few days, Rosa began to notice Emma more often. She would appear in doorways, silent and still, watching Rosa clean. She never came close, never made a sound. The other staff ignored her, stepping around her as if she were not there. But Rosa could not ignore her. There was something about the child that tugged at her heart. She looked so lonely. One afternoon, Rosa was dusting the library when Emma appeared in the doorway. Rosa set down her cloth and smiled. She did not say anything, did not try to coax the girl closer. She just smiled and went back to her work. After a few minutes, Emma stepped into the room. She walked slowly along the bookshelf, trailing her fingers over the spines. Rosa kept humming, an old lullaby her own mother used to sing. Emma stopped and tilted her head, listening. Rosa knelt down and pulled a feather duster from her cart. She waved it gently in the air, making it dance like a bird. Emma's eyes followed the movement. For the first time, Rosa saw something shift in the child's face. Not quite a smile, but a flicker of curiosity. Rosa handed the duster to her. Emma hesitated, then reached out and took it. She waved it slowly, watching the feathers sway. Rosa clapped softly, and Emma looked up, surprised. From that day on, Emma began to follow Rosa around the house. She did not help with the cleaning, but she stayed close, watching everything Rosa did. Rosa talked to her as she worked, not expecting answers, just sharing her thoughts. She told stories about her children, about the neighborhood where she lived, about the stray cat that visited her porch every morning. Emma listened, her eyes never leaving Rosa's face. The other staff noticed, but said nothing. They thought it was strange, but as long as the girl was not causing trouble, they did not care. Richard was away on business and did not know. The house continued its quiet routine. One rainy afternoon, Rosa was folding laundry in the sitting room. Emma sat on the floor nearby, arranging her stuffed animals in a circle. Rosa began to sing softly, a song in Spanish about a little bird who lost its way home. Her voice was gentle, worn smooth by years. Emma stopped playing and looked up. She stared at Rosa with an expression that was hard to read, something between sadness and longing. Rosa set down the towel she was folding and moved to sit on the floor beside Emma. She picked up one of the stuffed animals, a small gray elephant, and made it dance to the rhythm of the song. Emma watched, her hands still. Then, slowly, she picked up the rabbit and made it hop toward the elephant. Rosa's heart swelled. It was such a small thing, but it felt like a door opening. They sat together like that for almost an hour, playing in silence, except for Rosa's soft singing. When it was time for Rosa to leave, Emma followed her to the door. Rosa turned and knelt down so they were eye to eye. She touched Emma's cheek gently and said, "You are not alone, little one." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she did not cry. She just nodded, as if she understood. Richard returned from his trip late that night. He barely glanced at Emma as he walked past her room. He was exhausted, drained from days of tense negotiations and sleepless nights in hotel rooms. He poured himself a drink and sat in his study, staring at nothing. He thought about his daughter, alone in her room, and felt the familiar ache of helplessness. He wondered if he was failing her, if he should try something else, see another doctor, move to a different city. But he was so tired of trying. The next morning, Rosa arrived early. She found Emma already awake, sitting in the playroom with her toys scattered around her. Rosa greeted her with a warm smile and got to work. She cleaned the windows, swept the floor, and straightened the shelves. Emma watched her, then stood and walked over. She tugged on Rosa's sleeve. Rosa looked down, surprised. Emma pointed to a box of crayons on the table. Rosa sat down, and Emma climbed into the chair beside her. Rosa pulled out a piece of paper and drew a simple flower. Emma took a crayon and drew a wobbly circle next to it. Rosa drew a sun. Emma drew a line that might have been a horizon. They drew together, not speaking, just creating. Rosa did not push, did not ask questions. She just let Emma be. Hours passed. The house was quiet, except for the scratch of crayons on paper. When Rosa finally stood to continue her work, Emma did something she had never done before. She reached out and took Rosa's hand. Her grip was small and uncertain, but it was real. Rosa squeezed back gently, her eyes stinging with tears she would not let fall. That evening, Richard came home earlier than usual. He was in a foul mood. A deal had collapsed, and he was looking for someone to blame. He stormed through the house, barking orders at the staff. When he passed the playroom, he stopped. The door was slightly open, and he could hear something. He stepped closer and listened. It was humming, soft, tuneless, but unmistakable. He pushed the door open. Emma was sitting on the floor, surrounded by drawings. She was humming to herself, the same melody Rosa had sung. Richard stood frozen. He had never heard his daughter make a sound like that. It was not a word, but it was something. It was life. He did not know what to say. He stood there, watching her, afraid that if he moved or spoke, the moment would shatter. Emma looked up and saw him. The humming stopped. For a moment, father and daughter just stared at each other. Then Emma looked away and went back to her drawings. Richard backed out of the room slowly, his mind racing. The next day, he asked the head butler who had been spending time with Emma. The man hesitated, then mentioned the new cleaning lady. Richard frowned. He barely remembered hiring her. He asked to see her. Rosa was in the kitchen, scrubbing the counters, when the butler came to get her. She followed him nervously, wiping her hands on her apron. She had never spoken to Mr. Calloway directly. She had only seen him from a distance, a tall man with sharp suits and an even sharper expression. She was led to his study, a room filled with dark wood and leather furniture. Richard stood by the window, his back to her. He did not turn around when she entered. He asked, without preamble, what she had been doing with his daughter. Rosa's heart pounded. She thought she was in trouble, that she had overstepped. She stammered that she had only been kind to the girl, played with her a little while she worked. She hoped that was all right. Richard turned to face her. His expression was hard to read, somewhere between anger and confusion. He asked if Emma had spoken to her. Rosa shook her head. "No, sir," she said. "But she hums now. She plays. She holds my hand. She is not as alone." Richard looked at her for a long time. Rosa felt like she was being judged, weighed, measured. Then, to her surprise, his expression softened. He dismissed her, but not unkindly. As she left, he called after her. He said, "Keep doing whatever you are doing." Rosa was not sure what that meant, but she nodded and hurried out. Her hands were trembling. She had never been so close to someone so powerful, and it had frightened her. But as she went back to her work, she felt something else too. Hope. Days turned into weeks. Rosa continued to clean the house, but she also continued to spend time with Emma. They drew pictures, played simple games, and sat together in comfortable silence. Emma began to smile more, small, fleeting smiles that lit up her face. She started to follow Rosa everywhere, even outside to the garden, where Rosa sometimes took her breaks. They would sit on the grass, and Rosa would point out birds and flowers, telling Emma their names. Emma listened, her eyes bright with interest. Richard watched from a distance. He did not interfere, but he observed. He saw his daughter becoming more animated, more present. She still did not speak, but she was no longer the ghost she had been. She laughed sometimes, a soft, breathy sound that was almost like music. Richard had not heard her laugh since she was a baby. It broke something inside him, something that had been frozen for years. One evening, Richard came home to find Emma and Rosa in the living room. Rosa was singing again, and Emma was clapping along, her hands making soft patting sounds. Richard stood in the doorway, unnoticed. He felt a wave of emotion so strong it nearly knocked him over. Gratitude, regret, sorrow, hope, all of it at once. When Rosa saw him, she stopped singing and stood, ready to leave. But Richard raised a hand to stop her. He said, "Please, continue." Rosa hesitated, then sat back down. She resumed her song, and Emma resumed her clapping. Richard sat in a chair across from them and just watched. For the first time in years, his home felt like a home. Later that night, after Rosa had gone and Emma was in bed, Richard poured himself a drink and sat alone in his study. He thought about all the money he had spent, all the specialists he had hired, all the frustration and despair. And then this woman, this simple cleaning lady with rough hands and a kind heart, had done what none of them could. She had reached his daughter, not with science or strategy, but with patience and love. He realized then how blind he had been. He had thought money could solve everything, that the right expert or the right treatment would fix his daughter. But Emma did not need fixing. She needed someone who saw her, who did not treat her like a problem to be solved. Rosa had given her that. Richard made a decision. He would not let Rosa go. He would pay her more, give her whatever she needed to stay. Because as long as she was here, his daughter was healing. And maybe, just maybe, he could heal too. The following week, Richard called Rosa into his study again. This time, he offered her a new position. He wanted her to be Emma's companion, not just a cleaning lady. He would triple her salary, give her her own room in the house, whatever she wanted. Rosa was stunned. She had never imagined such a thing. She thought of her own family, her children who still needed her support. She said yes. From that day on, Rosa spent every day with Emma. They became inseparable. Rosa taught Emma simple things: how to braid hair, how to plant seeds in the garden, how to bake cookies. Emma soaked it all in, her world expanding in ways it never had before. She still did not speak, but she communicated in other ways. She drew pictures for Rosa, picked flowers for her, hugged her when she was happy. Richard began to spend more time at home. He cleared his schedule, delegated responsibilities, and made his daughter his priority. He joined Rosa and Emma for meals, sat with them in the garden, read stories to Emma at night. At first, it was awkward. He did not know how to talk to his daughter, how to be present without overwhelming her. But Rosa guided him, showing him how to be patient, how to wait, how to listen even when there were no words. Months passed. The mansion, once cold and silent, became warm and full of life. Emma thrived. She grew bolder, more confident. She explored the house, played outside, laughed often. Richard transformed too. He smiled more, softened in ways his business partners would not have recognized. He fell in love with his daughter all over again, not for who he wanted her to be, but for who she was. One spring morning, Rosa took Emma to the kitchen to teach her how to make bread. The cook, a stern woman named Mrs. Patterson, was skeptical at first. She ran a tight kitchen and did not appreciate interruptions. But Rosa asked politely, and Mrs. Patterson reluctantly agreed. Emma stood on a stool beside the counter, watching as Rosa measured flour and yeast. Rosa explained each step, her voice calm and encouraging. She let Emma pour the water, stir the mixture, knead the dough. Emma's hands were small and clumsy, but she tried hard, her face scrunched in concentration. When the dough was ready, Rosa shaped it into a round loaf and placed it in the oven. They sat at the kitchen table to wait, and Rosa told Emma about her own childhood, about learning to bake with her grandmother in a tiny kitchen that smelled like cinnamon and sugar. Emma listened, her eyes wide. When the bread was done, golden and fragrant, Rosa cut a thick slice and spread butter on it. She handed it to Emma, who took a bite and smiled so brightly that even Mrs. Patterson softened, offering the girl a cup of milk. Richard walked into the kitchen just then, drawn by the smell. He saw his daughter sitting at the table, her face smudged with flour, holding a piece of bread like it was the most precious thing in the world. He felt his throat tighten. How many moments like this had he missed, buried under work and worry? How many more would he have missed if Rosa had not come into their lives? He sat down beside Emma, and Rosa offered him a slice of bread. He took it, and Emma watched him expectantly. He took a bite and nodded. "It is delicious," he said. Emma beamed. It was the first time he had seen her proud of something she had made. He wanted to freeze that moment, hold on to it forever. As spring turned to summer, Emma's world continued to expand. Rosa took her outside more often, showing her the gardens that surrounded the mansion. There were rose bushes that climbed up trellises, beds of tulips and daisies, a fountain where birds came to drink. Emma had never paid much attention to any of it before, but now she noticed everything. She watched butterflies land on flowers, listened to bees hum as they collected pollen, felt the cool grass beneath her bare feet. One afternoon, they found a bird's nest in one of the lower branches of an oak tree. Inside were 3 tiny eggs, pale blue and speckled. Emma stood on her toes to see, her breath held in wonder. Rosa lifted her carefully so she could get a closer look. "Do not touch," Rosa whispered. "Just look." Emma nodded, her eyes glued to the nest. They visited the nest every day after that, watching as the eggs hatched and tiny chicks emerged, featherless and chirping. Emma was mesmerized. She drew pictures of the birds, tried to mimic their sounds, checked on them first thing every morning. Richard noticed how Emma came alive outside. He had always kept her indoors, afraid she would wander off or hurt herself. But Rosa showed him that Emma was capable of more than he had imagined. She was careful, attentive, curious. She just needed the chance to explore. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, the 3 of them sat together in the garden. Emma was lying on a blanket, staring up at the clouds. Rosa was beside her, pointing out shapes. "That one looks like a turtle," she said. Emma giggled softly and pointed to another cloud. Rosa squinted. "A dragon, maybe?" Emma shook her head and gestured with her hands, trying to explain. Richard watched them, smiling. He could not remember the last time he had just sat and watched clouds. He joined them on the blanket, lying back and letting the sky stretch out above him. Emma scooted closer and rested her head on his shoulder. He wrapped an arm around her, feeling the steady rise and fall of her breathing. "This," he thought, "is what matters. Not the deals, not the money, not the empire. Just this." As summer faded into autumn, Emma continued to grow. She was more expressive, more engaged. She communicated through gestures, expressions, drawings. She laughed more often, cried when she was sad, showed affection openly. She was still silent, but her silence no longer felt empty. It felt like a choice, a space she was waiting to fill when she was ready. Rosa sensed that Emma was on the verge of something. She did not push, but she began to create more opportunities for Emma to use her voice. She would ask simple questions that could not be answered with a nod or shake of the head. She would pause in the middle of songs, waiting to see if Emma would fill in the words. She would hold up objects and wait for Emma to name them, even if it was just in her mind. Rosa was planting seeds, trusting that one day they would grow. One October afternoon, the mansion was preparing for a small gathering. Richard had invited a few close business associates for dinner, something he rarely did anymore. The staff was busy cleaning and preparing, and there was an energy in the house that had been absent for years. Emma watched the preparations with curiosity, staying close to Rosa as always. That evening, when the guests arrived, Emma retreated to her room. She did not like strangers. The noise and commotion overwhelmed her. Rosa stayed with her, reading stories and keeping her calm. Through the floor, they could hear the muffled sounds of conversation and laughter. Emma pressed her hands over her ears, her face tense. Rosa set down the book and pulled Emma into her lap. She began to hum, rocking gently back and forth. Emma relaxed against her, her breathing slowing. Rosa sang softly, a lullaby about the moon watching over sleeping children. Emma's eyes grew heavy, and she nestled deeper into Rosa's embrace. Downstairs, Richard tried to focus on his guests, but his mind kept drifting to his daughter. He excused himself and went upstairs, walking quietly down the hall to Emma's room. The door was slightly open, and he could see Rosa holding Emma, singing to her in the dim light. It was such a tender scene, so full of love, that Richard felt his chest tighten. He stood there for a long moment, just watching, before turning and going back downstairs. The dinner ended late, and the guests eventually left. Richard climbed the stairs, exhausted but content. He checked on Emma and found her asleep in her bed, Rosa dozing in a chair beside her. Richard gently woke Rosa and sent her to her own room to rest properly. Then he sat in the chair himself, watching his daughter sleep. Her face was peaceful, relaxed in a way it had not been for years. He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, his heart full of a love he had almost forgotten how to feel. The next morning, Emma woke early. She found Richard still in the chair, asleep with his head tilted back awkwardly. She climbed out of bed and stood beside him, studying his face. He looked tired, older than she remembered. She reached out and touched his hand. Richard stirred and opened his eyes. When he saw Emma standing there, he smiled. "Good morning, sweetheart." Emma did not respond, but she climbed into his lap and curled up against his chest. Richard wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. They sat like that for a long time, not speaking, just being together. It was a moment of pure connection, father and daughter, no words needed. When Rosa arrived later that morning, she found them still sitting together. She smiled and quietly began tidying the room, giving them space. Emma eventually slid off Richard's lap and went to Rosa, taking her hand. Rosa knelt down and hugged her. "What shall we do today, mija?" Emma pointed to the window where the sun was shining brightly. Rosa nodded. "The garden it is." They spent the morning outside, exploring the paths and collecting fallen leaves. Emma arranged them by color, creating patterns on the ground. Rosa showed her how to press the leaves between the pages of a heavy book to preserve them. Emma was fascinated, carefully selecting the most beautiful leaves to save. Richard joined them for lunch, a simple meal of sandwiches and fruit eaten on a blanket under the oak tree. Emma sat between him and Rosa, eating slowly and watching a squirrel scamper up the tree trunk. Richard told a story about a business trip he had taken to Japan years ago, before Emma was born. Rosa listened, asking questions, drawing him out. Emma watched them both, her eyes moving from one face to the other. After lunch, Rosa suggested they make a scrapbook with the pressed leaves. They went inside and gathered supplies, spreading everything out on the dining room table. Rosa cut pages from thick paper, Emma arranged the leaves, and Richard helped glue them down. It was a simple activity, but it brought them together in a way that felt natural and easy. As they worked, Richard found himself talking more, sharing memories and stories he had not thought about in years. Rosa responded with her own stories, tales of her childhood in a small village, of her grandmother who had raised her, of the traditions and songs that had shaped her. Emma listened to it all, absorbing every word. By evening, they had created a beautiful scrapbook, each page a work of art. Emma held it carefully, running her fingers over the leaves encased in their paper frames. Rosa suggested they put it on the shelf in Emma's room, where she could look at it whenever she wanted. Emma nodded, carrying the scrapbook upstairs like a treasure. That night, Richard tucked Emma into bed and sat beside her. He opened the scrapbook and they looked through it together, remembering the day they had spent creating it. Emma pointed to one page where a particularly vibrant red leaf was pressed. Richard smiled. "That one is my favorite too." Emma looked up at him, her eyes serious. Then, in a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, her lips moved. She took a breath, and in a voice barely louder than a whisper, she said, "Mine, too." Richard froze. The words hung in the air between them, fragile and precious. Emma had spoken. She had chosen him, this moment, to break her years of silence. Richard's eyes filled with tears, and he pulled her into a tight embrace. "Emma," he whispered, "my Emma." Emma held on to him, her small arms wrapped around his neck. Richard rocked her gently, overwhelmed by emotion. When he finally pulled back, he saw that Emma was smiling. It was a tentative smile, uncertain but real. Richard ran to find Rosa, who was in her room preparing for bed. He knocked urgently, and when she opened the door, he could barely get the words out. She spoke. Rosa! Emma spoke! Rosa's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide. What did she say? She said, "Mine too." We were looking at the scrapbook and she spoke. Rosa rushed past him, hurrying to Emma's room. She found Emma sitting up in bed, looking both excited and scared. Rosa knelt beside the bed and took Emma's hands. "Can you say it again, Mia? Can you speak to me?" Emma looked at her, then at Richard, who had followed Rosa into the room. She opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. Her voice was soft, shaky, but it was there. "Rosa." Rosa burst into tears, pulling Emma into her arms. "You did it," she sobbed. "You found your voice." Richard stood in the doorway, watching the two of them, his own tears streaming down his face. This was the moment he had been waiting for, hoping for 7 long years, and it had finally come. Not because of expensive treatments or renowned specialists, but because of love, patience, and the simple kindness of a woman who had seen his daughter when no one else could. In the days that followed, Emma spoke more. Simple words at first. Yes, no, please, thank you, hungry, tired. Each word was a victory, a small miracle that filled the house with joy. Rosa worked with her gently, never pushing, always encouraging. She would name objects and wait for Emma to repeat them. She would ask questions and give Emma time to answer. She would sing songs and pause, letting Emma fill in the words. Richard hired a speech therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Lewis, who came to the house 3 times a week. But this time it was different. Emma was ready. She wanted to learn. She wanted to communicate. With Rosa by her side, holding her hand and offering encouragement, Emma made progress that astonished Dr. Lewis. Within a month, Emma was speaking in short sentences. Her voice was still quiet, hesitant, but it was growing stronger every day. She asked for things, expressed preferences, told stories about her day. The first time she said, "I love you" to Richard, he cried so hard he had to leave the room to compose himself. The staff marveled at the transformation. The little girl who had been a silent ghost was now a bright, talkative child. She greeted them in the mornings, thanked them for meals, asked questions about their lives. The mansion, once so quiet and sad, was filled with the sound of Emma's voice. Rosa's own children came to visit one weekend, bringing their families. Emma was shy at first, hiding behind Rosa when they arrived. But Rosa's daughter, Maria, knelt down and introduced herself gently. "I am Maria," she said. "Your Rosa is my mama. That makes us like family, does it not?" Emma peeked out from behind Rosa and nodded. "Family," she repeated softly. Maria smiled. "Would you like to play with my kids? They are about your age." Emma looked up at Rosa, who nodded encouragingly. Emma took a tentative step forward, then another. Maria's children, a boy and a girl, rushed forward to greet her. Within minutes, they were playing together, Emma's laughter ringing out across the garden. Richard watched from the window of his study, his heart so full it felt like it might burst. That evening, they all sat together for dinner. It was loud and chaotic, with children chattering and adults laughing. Emma sat between Rosa and Richard, eating her food and listening to the conversation swirling around her. At one point, Rosa's son, Miguel, asked Emma what her favorite thing to do was. Emma thought for a moment, then said, "Draw pictures with Rosa." Miguel smiled. "My mama taught me to draw too when I was little. She is a good teacher." Emma nodded seriously. The best. Rosa reached over and squeezed Emma's hand, her eyes shining with tears. Emma squeezed back. As the months passed, Emma's confidence grew. She started asking to go places, to see new things. Richard took her to the park, to museums, to the zoo. She was hesitant at first, overwhelmed by crowds and noise, but with Richard and Rosa by her side, she began to explore the world beyond the mansion walls. One day, Richard suggested they visit the ocean. Emma had never seen the sea, had never felt sand between her toes or heard the crash of waves. They drove for hours, Rosa and Emma in the back seat, singing songs and playing games. When they finally arrived, Emma stood at the edge of the beach, staring at the vast expanse of water stretching to the horizon. She was silent for a long moment, and Richard worried that she was overwhelmed. But then she turned to him, her eyes bright with wonder. "It is so big," she said. Richard knelt beside her. "It is. Do you want to get closer?" Emma nodded. They walked down to the water's edge, and Emma gasped when the cold water rushed over her feet. She jumped back, then laughed. "It is cold." Rosa joined them, and they spent the afternoon building sand castles, collecting shells, and splashing in the shallow waves. Emma's laughter was carried away by the sea breeze, a sound so pure and joyful that Richard felt like his heart might explode. This, he thought, is what life is supposed to be. On the drive home, Emma fell asleep in the back seat, her head resting on Rosa's shoulder. Rosa stroked her hair gently, humming a lullaby. Richard glanced at them in the rearview mirror and smiled. "Thank you," he said quietly. Rosa looked up, meeting his eyes in the mirror. For what? For everything. For saving her, for saving me. Rosa shook her head. "I did not save anyone, Mr. Calloway. I just loved her. That is all." Richard felt his throat tighten. "That is everything, Rosa. That is everything." As they pulled into the driveway of the mansion, Richard realized that his life had changed in ways he never could have imagined. A year ago, he had been a lonely, bitter man, trapped in a silent house with a daughter he could not reach. Now, he had a family. He had laughter and love and hope. And it was all because of one woman who had arrived with nothing but a kind heart and rough hands. Emma continued to thrive. By the time she was 10, she was speaking fluently, though she remained quiet by nature. She loved books and art, spent hours drawing and painting, and had a special fondness for animals. Richard enrolled her in a small private school where she made friends and excelled in her studies. Rosa remained with them, not as an employee, but as family. She had her own suite in the mansion, and her children visited often, bringing their own families. The house was filled with laughter and warmth, a far cry from the cold, silent place it had once been. Richard's life changed completely. He sold off parts of his business, stepped back from the relentless pursuit of more. He realized that all the wealth in the world meant nothing if he was not there for his daughter. He became a different kind of man, one who valued people over profit, connection over control. He volunteered at local charities, funded programs for children with special needs, and became an advocate for patience and understanding in parenting. Emma never forgot what Rosa had done for her. Even as she grew older and more independent, she remained close to the woman who had given her a voice. She would sit with Rosa in the garden, just as they had when she was small, and they would talk about everything and nothing. Rosa was her confidant, her mentor, her second mother. One summer afternoon, when Emma was 16, she and Rosa were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset. Emma had just returned from a school trip, full of stories and excitement. She talked about the places she had seen, the friends she had made, the future she was dreaming of. Rosa listened, her heart swelling with pride. This bright, confident young woman was the same silent child she had met all those years ago. It was a miracle, one Rosa would never take for granted. Emma paused, her expression turning serious. "Rosa," she said, "I need to tell you something." Rosa looked at her, concerned. "What is it, mija?" Emma took a breath. "I have been thinking a lot about what I want to do with my life. I want to help other kids like me, kids who feel lost or alone or different. I want to study psychology, maybe become a therapist. I want to give other people what you gave me." Rosa's eyes filled with tears. She reached out and took Emma's hand. "You will be wonderful at that," she said. "You have such a kind heart." Emma squeezed her hand. "I learned from the best." Richard, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped out onto the porch. He was older now, his hair gray, his face lined with years, but his eyes were bright. He sat down beside them, joining the conversation. "Your mother would be so proud of you," he said to Emma. "I am so proud of you." Emma looked at him, then at Rosa. "I am proud of us," she said, "of what we have become. We are a family, a real family. And that is all because Rosa saw something in me that no one else did. She did not give up on me, even when everyone else had." Richard nodded, his throat tight. "She saved us both," he said. They sat together in the fading light, three people whose lives had been changed by kindness, patience, and love. The mansion behind them was no longer a cold monument to wealth. It was a home, filled with memories and laughter, with struggles overcome and bonds forged. It was a place where a silent child had found her voice, where a broken father had learned to be whole, and where a humble cleaning lady had proven that the most valuable things in life cannot be bought. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and joys. Emma graduated from high school with honors, giving the speech at commencement that moved many in the audience to tears. She spoke about her journey, about the years of silence and the miracle of finding her voice. She thanked her father for never giving up on her, and she thanked Rosa for showing her that love could heal anything. When Emma left for college, studying psychology as she had planned, the mansion felt emptier. Richard and Rosa both felt the absence keenly. But Emma called every week, sharing stories about her classes, her friends, her life. She came home for holidays and breaks, filling the house with energy and laughter once again. During Emma's second year of college, Rosa began to slow down. She was getting older, and the years of hard work had taken their toll on her body. Her knees ached constantly, her back hurt, and she tired easily. Richard insisted she stopped working entirely, that she just rest and enjoy her life. Rosa protested at first, saying she needed to feel useful, but eventually she agreed. She spent her days in the garden, tending to the flowers and vegetables she had planted over the years. She read books, wrote letters to her children and grandchildren, and took long naps in the afternoon sun. Richard often joined her, and they would sit together in comfortable silence, two old friends who had been through so much together. One autumn afternoon, as the leaves turned gold and red, Rosa and Richard were sitting on the bench beneath the oak tree. The same tree where they had sat with Emma so many years ago. The same tree where the bird's nest had been. Rosa was quiet, staring at the sky with a distant expression. "Mr. Calloway," she said softly, "I need to tell you something." Richard looked at her, concerned by the seriousness in her tone. "What is it, Rosa?" Rosa took a breath. "I am dying. The doctors told me last month. Cancer. It has spread too far for treatment." Richard felt like the ground had dropped out from under him. "No," he said. "No, Rosa. We will get the best doctors, the best care. We will fight this." Rosa shook her head gently. "I am tired, Mr. Calloway. I have lived a good life, a long life. I have seen my children grow up, have grandchildren. I have been blessed to be part of your family, to watch Emma grow into the wonderful woman she is. I am ready." Richard could not speak. Tears streamed down his face, and he reached for Rosa's hand. She squeezed it, her grip still strong despite her frailty. "Do not cry for me," she said. "I am not afraid. I am grateful." They sat together for a long time, holding hands, not speaking. The sun set slowly, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Richard thought about all the years they had shared, all the moments big and small. Rosa had changed his life in ways he could never repay. She had given him back his daughter, taught him how to love, shown him what truly mattered. And now he was losing her. Emma came home as soon as Richard called. She rushed into the house, her face pale with worry, and found Rosa resting in her room. Rosa smiled when she saw her. "Mija," she said softly, "come sit with me." Emma sat on the edge of the bed, taking Rosa's hand. "Rosa, I am so sorry. I should have been here." Rosa shook her head. "You are exactly where you should be, living your life, following your dreams. That is what I want for you." Emma's tears fell freely. "I do not know how to say goodbye to you." "You are my mother in every way that matters. And you are my daughter," she said. "I love you so much, Emma. I am so proud of who you have become." They held each other, crying together, finding comfort in the connection they had built over so many years. Richard stood in the doorway, watching, his own heart breaking. This woman who had come into their lives with nothing, who had asked for nothing, had given them everything. Rosa lived for 3 more months. She spent that time surrounded by family, her own children and grandchildren visiting often, along with Richard and Emma. The mansion was filled with people and love, and Rosa presided over it all like a queen in her garden. She told stories, sang songs, offered wisdom and comfort. She made sure everyone knew how much they meant to her. On a cold December morning, Rosa passed away peacefully in her sleep. Emma was holding her hand, and Richard was sitting beside the bed. It was quiet and gentle, and when Rosa took her last breath, it felt like the world paused for just a moment, acknowledging the passing of someone truly special. The funeral was held in the garden, beneath the oak tree. Hundreds of people came to pay their respects. Rosa's children and grandchildren, the staff from the mansion, neighbors from the community where Rosa had once lived, and many others whose lives she had touched over the years. Emma spoke at the service, her voice strong and clear, telling the story of the cleaning lady who had changed everything. She spoke about Rosa's kindness, her patience, her unwavering love. She talked about the day Rosa had first arrived at the mansion, a stranger with rough hands and a gentle heart. She described how Rosa had seen a silent, lonely child and had chosen to love her, not because she was paid to, not because she had to, but simply because that was who Rosa was. Emma's words moved everyone to tears, and when she finished, the crowd stood in silent tribute to a woman who had lived an extraordinary life in the most ordinary way. After the funeral, Richard and Emma returned to the mansion. It felt emptier without Rosa, quieter in a way that was painful. They wandered through the rooms, remembering moments they had shared with her. In the kitchen, where Rosa had taught Emma to bake bread. In the garden, where they had sat together on countless afternoons. In Emma's room, where the scrapbook of pressed leaves still sat on the shelf. Richard sat in his study that night, staring at a photograph of the three of them taken a few years earlier. They were in the garden, smiling at the camera, Emma in the middle with her arms around both Rosa and Richard. They looked like a family, because that is what they were. Richard felt the weight of Rosa's absence like a physical thing, pressing down on his chest. But as he sat there, he realized something. Rosa's love had not died with her. It lived on in Emma, in the way she spoke to people with kindness, in the way she saw the world with compassion. It lived on in Richard, in the way he had learned to value what truly mattered, in the way he had opened his heart. Rosa's legacy was not just in the lives she had touched, but in the way those lives would continue to touch others. Emma went back to college after the funeral, carrying Rosa's memory with her. She threw herself into her studies with renewed purpose, determined to honor Rosa by helping others the way Rosa had helped her. She volunteered at clinics, worked with children who struggled to communicate, and began research on the power of human connection in healing trauma. In her senior year, Emma wrote her thesis on selective mutism and the role of attachment in language development. She used her own story, with permission, as a case study. She wrote about the years of silence, the failed treatments, the specialists who had given up. And she wrote about Rosa, about how one person's unconditional love and patience had succeeded where everything else had failed. Her thesis won awards and was published in academic journals, bringing attention to the importance of emotional connection in treating children with communication disorders. After graduation, Emma was accepted into a prestigious graduate program in clinical psychology. She continued her research, expanding it to include other forms of childhood trauma and the healing power of relationships. She became known in her field as a passionate advocate for treating the whole child, not just symptoms, and for recognizing that sometimes the best medicine is simply being seen and loved. Richard continued to run his business, but on a much smaller scale. He had sold most of his holdings, keeping only what was necessary to support his family and fund the charitable foundation he had established in Rosa's name. The Rosa Martinez Foundation provided support for families with children who had special needs, offering not just financial assistance, but also connecting them with resources and support networks. Richard poured his energy into the foundation, finding more satisfaction in that work than he had ever found in building his empire. One spring day, 5 years after Rosa's death, Emma came home for a visit. She was finishing her doctorate and would soon begin her career as a licensed therapist. She and Richard sat in the garden, on the bench beneath the oak tree, the same spot where so many important moments had taken place. "Dad," Emma said, "I have been thinking about something." Richard looked at her. "What is it?" "I want to open a practice here, in this city. I want to work with children like I was, kids who are struggling to find their voice. And I want to do it the way Rosa would have done it, with patience and love and without judgment." Richard smiled, his heart full. "I think that is a wonderful idea. Rosa would be so proud." Emma nodded. "I know she would. And I was thinking, maybe we could use part of the mansion. There is so much space, and it could be a place where families feel welcome and safe. We could create a center, not just for therapy, but for support and connection." Richard considered this. The mansion had been his monument to success, his fortress against the world. But Rosa had transformed it into a home filled with love. Now, Emma wanted to transform it again into a place of healing. It felt right, like the natural evolution of everything Rosa had started. "Let us do it," he said. Over the next year, they converted the east wing of the mansion into a therapeutic center. They created warm, inviting spaces for therapy sessions, a large playroom filled with toys and art supplies, a library with books for children and parents, and a garden area where families could relax. They hired a small staff of therapists and support workers who shared Emma's philosophy of compassionate, relationship-based care. The Emma and Rosa Center for Children opened on what would have been Rosa's 70th birthday. Families came from all over the city, drawn by the center's reputation and by Emma's own story. Emma worked directly with children, using the lessons Rosa had taught her. She sat on floors and drew pictures. She sang songs and hummed lullabies. She waited patiently for children to trust her, never pushing, always accepting. And slowly, one by one, children who had been silent found their voices. Richard often walked through the center, watching Emma work. He saw Rosa in everything she did, in the gentle way she spoke to children, in the patience she showed to worried parents, in the love that radiated from her. He knew that Rosa's spirit lived on, not just in memory, but in action, in the lives being changed every day. One afternoon, Richard was sitting in the garden when a woman approached him. She was young, maybe 30, and she held the hand of a small boy who could not have been more than 5. The boy was silent, his eyes downcast, his body tense. "Excuse me," the woman said hesitantly. "Are you Mr. Calloway?" Richard stood. "I am. Can I help you?" The woman's eyes filled with tears. "I just wanted to thank you. My son has been coming here for 3 months now, working with Dr. Emma. He had not spoken since his father died 2 years ago. The doctors said he might never speak again. But yesterday, he said my name. He called me Mama." Richard felt his own eyes sting. He looked down at the boy, who was peeking up at him shyly. "That is wonderful," Richard said. "I am so happy for you both." The woman nodded, wiping her tears. "Dr. Emma told us about her own story, about the woman who helped her. Rosa, right?" Richard nodded. The woman continued. "I just wanted you to know that what Rosa started, what you and Dr. Emma are continuing, it is changing lives. You saved my son. You gave me my boy back." Richard knelt down so he was eye level with the boy. "Hello," he said gently. "What is your name?" The boy looked at his mother, who nodded encouragingly. He turned back to Richard and, in a voice barely above a whisper, said, "Thomas." Richard smiled. "It is nice to meet you, Thomas. You are very brave." Thomas smiled back, a small, tentative smile, but it was there. Richard stood and shook the mother's hand. "Thank you for telling me this," he said. "It means more than you know." As they walked away, Richard returned to the bench and sat down heavily. He looked up at the oak tree, at the leaves rustling in the breeze, and he felt Rosa's presence. He knew she was not really there, but he also knew that her love was everywhere, in every life touched by the center, in every child who found their voice, in every family that found hope. "Rosa," he whispered, "I hope you can see this. I hope you know what you started. Thank you for everything. Thank you for saving us." The breeze picked up, rustling the leaves more loudly, and Richard smiled. He chose to believe that Rosa had heard him, that somehow, somewhere, she was smiling too. Emma came out to join him a few minutes later. She sat beside him and took his hand. They sat in comfortable silence, father and daughter, connected by love and by the memory of the woman who had brought them together. The sun set slowly, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and the mansion behind them glowed with warm light from the windows where children were laughing and healing. This was Rosa's legacy, not wealth or fame or recognition, but love multiplied, spreading out in ripples that would touch countless lives for generations to come. She had been just a cleaning lady, a woman with rough hands and a humble heart. But she had changed the world in the way that mattered most, one person at a time, one act of kindness at a time, one moment of genuine connection at a time. Years later, Emma would tell Rosa's story to her own children. She would take them to the garden and show them the bench beneath the oak tree. She would explain how their grandmother Rosa, though not related by blood, had been the most important person in her life. She would teach them the lessons Rosa had taught her, about patience and kindness and the power of simply seeing someone for who they are. And those children would grow up understanding that the greatest treasures in life are not things that can be bought or sold, but the connections between human beings, the love that flows between hearts, and the courage to show up for someone else even when it is hard. They would know that every person matters, that everyone deserves to be seen and heard and loved, and that sometimes the most profound changes come not from grand gestures, but from simple acts of kindness repeated day after day. The mansion still stands today, no longer a monument to one man's success, but a testament to the transformative power of love. The Emma and Rosa Center continues to serve families, continues to help children find their voices, continues to honor the memory of a humble woman who changed everything simply by caring. And on quiet evenings, when the sun sets and paints the sky in gold and crimson, if you sit very still on the bench beneath the oak tree, you can almost hear it. A gentle humming, an old lullaby, carried on the breeze. It is Rosa's song, her love made audible, reminding everyone who hears it that kindness matters, that patience heals, and that sometimes the people who change the world are not the ones with the most power or money, but the ones with the biggest hearts. This is the story of how a millionaire's silent daughter found her voice, all because a humble cleaning lady arrived and saw her for who she truly was. It is a story about the power of love to break through barriers, about the importance of patience in a world that demands quick results, and about the truth that the most valuable things in life cannot be bought. It is Rosa's story, and Emma's story, and Richard's story, but most of all, it is a story about hope, about the possibility of transformation, and about the extraordinary impact one ordinary person can have when they choose to love without conditions, to give without expecting anything in return, and to see the humanity in everyone they meet.